All right, so welcome to Honest Voice. My name's Todd.
I'm Carolsue. This is episode 01, but technically speaking, it's our second episode. So if you haven't had a chance to view our intro, we invite you to go and do that. You'll get a little background about our philosophies and what we'll be doing with our podcast.
Yeah. So this first one is about identifying dysfunctional communication, which is real important. We're going to be teaching, as we identified in the intro video, we're going to be talking about ways you can communicate, how to de-escalate people that are in crisis, how to just overall communicate more effectively with anyone you interact with. It's pretty amazing once you start learning these skills. First of all, as we said in the first in our intro, is that we had no idea that these kind of things existed. We just thought this is the way everybody talks, and sometimes we have conflicts, sometimes we argue, sometimes we have fights, but we've discovered, since being involved with what started out with crisis intervention for law enforcement, teaching them how to communicate with an individual in crisis, we've expanded this over the last decade to basically include everybody. The communication skills that we learned in crisis intervention translates to everyone. And we have been researching this over the last 10 years. In fact, we'll share with you real quickly, once we got involved with crisis intervention, we actually adapted it to civilian interaction, and then that sort of spawned us doing basically what we call verbal de-escalation, how to calm people down that are in crisis or getting upset. We expanded that into civilians. So everything that we talk about is not going to have a whole lot to do with law enforcement, but that's where it started, and we just want you to be aware of it. And if you're interested in crisis communication, you can start there by looking up crisis intervention team training. That'll give you an idea.
Yeah.
For some of you, if you really get interested in this, I highly recommend look up your local precinct and find out if they have a crisis intervention program and ask if you can monitor it. It might be eye-opening to see what the police actually deal with. A lot of our problems with law enforcement honestly come from a lack of information or a lack of knowledge into what it is that they really do, and sometimes the situations that they're put in and the restrictions on what they can do. So that might open your mind a little bit to get involved with that. But anyways, we expanded it to the civilian sector. We've done trainings for YWCA,
The local hospitals.
our local hospitals. So we go in there and we teach nurses how to basically handle it when somebody's very upset, probably being inappropriate, probably being really rude, saying things to you that the normal individual would respond a lot differently than the professional has to in order to keep their job. But overall, what we found out is that these are just best practice communication styles is really what it is.
So what we've learned over the course of years in the mental health field and just existing in the world in 2026 is that dysfunctional communication is everywhere. We don't get a crash course in this as young adults. We live with what we learn growing up with our parents and the people around us doing the best they know how from what they've learned. And as time goes on, it becomes something that seems normal because it's everywhere. But we lose focus on exactly how damaging a lot of these behaviors can be. Sarcasm is seen as a very funny way to give a joke in a sitcom, but in reality can land cruel and mean and dismissive. Withdrawing from a conversation because you're uncomfortable with it may seem like the best choice, but may not help you get your point across and may not help move the relationship forward if that's what you want to do. So there are lots of ways that dysfunctional communication just gets in the way of us living life the way we want to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and a lot of times people shout because that's all that they have ever known.
Yeah.
They've created this belief, and it's not even a belief, it's just the style of communication that basically comes out of us because it's what we've learned.
Yeah.
That when you want somebody to listen, that you have to over assert, you have to get angry about it. And this is especially problematic when you have supervisors that do this. I mean, we've seen that a lot, and a lot of that comes from our own personal insecurity. A lot of people think that they're not going to get taken seriously unless they elevate themselves to a certain level of loudness, and we're here to show you that you can be assertive without having to be cruel, or I'm just going to call it for what it is. Sometimes it's just being mean, and that's one of the things we want to stop doing. We're going to get into the mechanics of that as well, because a lot of times those what I just identified as meanness are actually protective mechanisms that we've developed because people have been mean to us. So it doesn't seem very logical to the average individual that has been through this training that when someone's mean to you, that we're going to start teaching you how to be kind to them. Because a lot of that meanness comes from insecurity, it comes from programming, fear, yeah, and that's a big deal. I'm glad you said that one because we're going to be getting into anger later, and a lot of people don't realize that for a lot of the responses with anger, anger is a secondary emotion to fear. People react the way they react because they're actually afraid. They're afraid of not being heard. They're afraid of not being complied with. They're afraid of not looking powerful in the moment. Like if you've got a parent that prides himself on being the alpha or whatever. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound sarcastic. I'm not a big fan of alpha. I have to show that, yeah, because it's performative, and we'll talk about that too. I mean, the people that identify themselves as alphas they're putting on a show, and I hate to say it, it's still an indicator of insecurity. If I have to prove to you that I'm anything, if I have to prove to you that I'm anything, it's because of an insecurity on my part. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to show you how it's not necessary. And for those of you that pride themselves on being an alpha, don't get angry at us. We want to help you because, honestly, a lot of the people that we've known that have these, self-identified as alpha personalities, they're not very happy. They're sort of miserable because it's a lot of work to keep that up, to have to prove that, it's like falling down and getting up and saying it didn't hurt. Meanwhile, you're bleeding and, something's broken. But you have to act tough, and it's really not necessary. And in a lot of ways, we're going to show how that type of mindset has become problematic for a lot of people, just people in general. If we do get on the side of like certain genders when we're talking about these things, remember that, we're trainers. And we're not going to make up anything. So if I'm talking about males or Carolsue's talking about females, it's because that's our experience. And this is where we have expertise. So, for any other genders, we hope that some of these contextual issues will be adaptable. Yeah. But we don't mean to leave anybody out. These tools are for everybody.
Absolutely.
To try to communicate more effectively.
So one of Todd's foremost philosophies is about not wasting time. And so we talk a lot about dysfunctional communication because in addition to just being negative and unpleasant to deal with respect to relationship building, it's a time waster. So when you're proving your own point or dismissing someone else's or giving someone a sarcastic response or shouting, you're wasting time that could be spent in building a better relationship. And we're absolutely here to talk about how to make a relationship healthy and happy and keep it that way. And so we want to get out in front of this and just identify some of the behaviors that we've absolutely both been guilty of in our past and have slip-ups and things from time to time. But the important thing is to identify those things and then get back on track as soon as possible so that you can keep building and keep growing.
Yeah, so disclaimer, we're not therapists.
That's right.
We are trainers, and if these issues seem to be more to the extreme of what you deal with, then we encourage that you seek out therapy. Absolutely. And for those of you in a little public service announcement, like I always do when I'm teaching crisis intervention training, is that, if you need help with something, we highly recommend therapy because if a therapist is doing their job the way they're supposed to, they're trying to work themselves out of a job. And what that means is that if you have discomfort in anything, basically, it's sort of an identification that you are lacking a coping skill. Like, just ask yourself a simple question. When you're in a group of people and something happens and everybody reacts, why does everybody react differently? And that's because we all have different coping skills. Why is it that somebody can say something to two of us and we can walk away and one of us go, man, what a jerk. And then the other person go, well, I didn't think they were being a jerk. I think they were trying to help us. That's because of our filters that we have, our programming. We want to help you build this up in the strongest possible. I mean, ultimately our goal is to make you unflappable. But if these things are beyond your control at this moment, your ability to calm yourself down, then we highly recommend therapy. And as a follow-on for someone who's been in therapy find somebody that you click with. You don't owe the therapist anything. So if you go in there, just like any relationship, you don't fall in love with everybody you meet. So if you go into a therapist, make sure the relationship feels comfortable. And what I always recommend is give it 3 sessions, and if the click is not there, then find somebody else and tell them that. Say, look, I don't feel that, your therapeutic intervention style or whatever it may be, is what I need right now. I need somebody that's more into just talking and helping me get this stuff out. You don't even really have to explain yourself. You're paying for the service. So I'm talking about this way too long.
And one more quick thing before we move on, if you don't mind. So another reason that engaging a third party, such as a therapist, can be helpful is because what we talk about on this podcast is a relatively normal range of behavior. Sometimes when people are dysfunctionally communicating, it's because they're abusers. Right? We're never saying you should learn how to cope with abusive behavior.
Right?
That's not a thing.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So all of us have been guilty of sarcasm, of shouting, of, walking away from a conversation without really letting it fully resolve. But if there is abusive or controlling behavior going on, that's not something that's your responsibility to cope with. That's your responsibility to exit stage left or engage some assistance and support to make sure that you're safe.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And thank you for bringing it up. So my rule of thumb always is that, if it's not physically harming you in some capacity, then you might be able to develop a coping skill for it. But if you're being attacked verbally, that's nobody should have to deal with that.
Absolutely
so we're not asking you to build the coping skills for that. But
right.
There's a lot of sarcasm that can get irritating. There's a lot of things, the way people talk, people shut down, they start stonewalling you because they don't know how to communicate about whatever topic. Those are the things that we want to help you with. So it's important to understand the difference.
Absolutely. So again, speaking within the realm of normal human behavior, it's important to know that dysfunctional communication does not necessarily mean that the person you're talking to is a bad person. I think we can all reflect back, some of us probably not very far, and think about a time when we reacted in a way that we were later very embarrassed by. We all make mistakes, right?
Yeah, and we all have, both of us, everything we're talking about we're providing you with learned experiences because at the beginning we didn't communicate very effectively at all.
We did not.
That's why we were so blown away by crisis intervention. It's like, why doesn't marriage counseling ought to include crisis intervention communication where you teach each other how to, for lack of a better phrase, fight respectfully. I mean, and it's not really fighting. It's solving a problem. And one very simple, I'm going to throw this out because I don't want to forget, is one very simple mindset that you can adapt almost immediately. If you're in conflict with somebody, your significant other, somebody you're close to, try to start looking at whatever the conflict is, rather than both of you attacking each other, attack the problem. Like, there's a massive difference between me pointing a finger at you and Carolsue pointing the finger back at me and trying to solve that particular finger pointing issue than there is if we're both pointing in the same direction and say, how do we fix that?
Yes.
How do we do this so we're not getting escalated, we're not losing sleep over it? I mean, in my past, I've slept on the couch before, and these are wasted hours where you're in a relationship, but for these times where you're arguing and you're not communicating effectively, it's stagnant. You're not doing, there's no development, there's no personal development, there's no kind of growth. It's really just stagnation, if not degradation. I mean, the more some people fight, the more influenced they become, and it actually degrades both individuals' communication. It's almost like two bad influences negatively influencing each other, but it's all their behavior. Like Carolsue said, we all have had these styles of communication. It doesn't make us a bad person. It's just we want to get out of that to where we're communicating more effectively. Otherwise, we're honestly just wasting time.
Yep.
I mean, why talk at all?
Exactly. So today we're going to identify some of the common patterns, some of the common dysfunctional patterns, and we're going to give you some alternatives in case these are things that strike a chord with you. So the first one we're going to talk about is sarcasm.
This is really common. I mean, I was in the military for 20 years. Carolsue grew up in a military environment. We worked with cops for over a decade. Honestly, and we love our law enforcement people, so if you guys are watching this, we love you. But man, some of them, they can't talk without being sarcastic. Like, honestly, it's like everything that comes out, it's like, it's an attack, it's sarcasm. Something as simple as walking into the room with a bag of chips and somebody going, "Oh, I see how you are. You didn't bring enough for all of us." Like there's just this desire to attack, and I'm sort of a logical thinker, and my first response will be, "Well, you didn't tell me you wanted any." I'm just like, whatever. But it's just so common. There just seems to be a need to cut another person down. And right now, you can read this in the news, we're in a communication deficit. Like there are people that are just swearing off relationships. They just don't want to get involved. And a lot of this is because of this kind of communication. There's a lot of guys, and here we go into the gender thing. There's a lot of guys that I talk to, that I communicate with, that think it's okay to insult a woman on like the first date. They think it's playful banter, but it's just insults. And when you get into it, when a person says, "Hey, I'm just joking around," it's like, okay, but that's only funny to you.
Right.
So why would you want to give that to somebody else?
Yep. So just to give us an example, let's say that you make a comment and it doesn't land the way you wanted it to, and someone feels insulted or hurt, and then you respond by saying, "I was just joking. You don't have to take everything so seriously." So you've got that little sarcastic edge there, and again, putting the responsibility back on the other person to think something's funny that they
really
don't.
Common. Yeah.
It is very common. When instead, the honest voice response might be, "You know what? That came out a lot harsher than I meant it to. Let me try again. I apologize about that."
Yeah. So another example of sarcasm, it's like, it's funny how it's always a problem when I say something. See, now that's one way to put it on them, that they're always complaining about the way I'm talking because they're not really receiving it, and you want them to listen, but now you're sort of making a cutting joke about their poor listening skills.
That's right.
But in the moment, what we're asking you to say, and a lot of this stuff is going to sound counterintuitive. It's like, that's just weird. Well, everything is weird that we don't already do. Okay, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, it's true.
Anything that you're not associated with, that you have comfortable with, is weird. And we have all been programmed, patterned, influenced to talk in these ways that are really not good for us. So something better than saying, that's funny how it's only a problem when I say something. A better way to get that across, if somebody makes a joke about what you're trying to say, is just say, "Look, I'm really frustrated right now, and I want to talk about what feels unfair," instead of making a joke about it. So, could we just communicate without the jokes for a moment? And I sort of gave you a tool sort of indirectly, but whenever you're trying to get somebody over to your side, it always helps to frame it as a question requesting help. Like, even though, in the intro, I said, you don't want to use the words like calm down because you're directing somebody now, and when they're angry, nobody wants to be told what to do. I mean, technically, nobody likes to be told what to do anyways.
It's true.
But when they're angry and you try to direct them, it becomes a conflict, and that's one of the things we never tell people what to do. So if you can phrase, can I get you to just lower your voice a little bit so, we can communicate a little better, or so I can hear you better? When you ask it that way with no expectations, and that's really important right there too. If they can't do it in that moment, you don't keep pushing it. You just do your best to try to model that calm voice, and eventually they'll pick up on it. A lot of situations that I've seen, if you just maintain respect, eventually there's a certain level of embarrassment that they might have.
Sometimes it takes a while, but people do get there.
And they'll calm down, and I guarantee you they'll come back around with an apology for their actions later.
Yeah. So sarcasm's a big one. Another one we want to cover is stonewalling. So let's say that you've hit an uncomfortable topic in a conversation, and the other person just shuts down. And so you say something, and you really like to continue the conversation, and the other person just says, "Well, I don't know what you want me to say about that. I just don't have anything to say about that." So what they've done in that moment is maybe they just don't know how to respond. They're frustrated. Maybe they're a little worried about disappointing you, but for whatever reason, they decide to just tap out. I don't know what to say.
And maybe they've also, we're going to hit both sides. Maybe they've also been programmed that if they do speak their truth, they're going to get yelled at.
That's very true.
So a lot of times we'll act like we're in control of it. Even though we want to talk, we see that they're not receptive. So we'll go like, I just can't do this right now.
Yeah. And it's completely normal in the midst of a conflict or a tough conversation to get overwhelmed and maybe to freeze up. It's something that does happen. It's absolutely happened to me. But instead of just throwing that comment of, I don't know what to say, I can't think of anything to say, or nothing's going to make you happy, then what we want to say is just take a little bit of a risk with vulnerability and say, look, I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I need a little time. before I can talk more calmly. So what that gives back to your partner is that I'm still invested in this conversation, but right now I don't think I'm going to be able to have it in a healthy way. And you're asking for a little space, a little time to recollect your thoughts.
Yeah.
But what you want to make sure you do is do come back to it. You know, if you're able to take that break, then make sure you initiate that conversation again when you're feeling a little bit more calm.
And it might be helpful to give your own time rather than getting pressured into, well, how long? What is it going to take?
Right.
You know, give that time yourself, own up to it, and just say, you know, I need 30 minutes. Just give me 30 minutes downtime, and we'll come back to this. So it's really important. The same thing with if you just fall into that situation where you end up being silent and you really just can't go any further, you know, just tell the person. Say, look, I don't want to look like I'm ignoring you. I honestly just don't know what to say. And, you know, a lot of us are afraid to talk like that because we've been criticized for
Absolutely.
it. A lot of us say, oh, you don't know what to say. You can't just use your words. You got a mouth. You know, I mean, those kind of, so you guys.
That's sarcasm.
Yeah, that's sarcasm. Yeah. So you can probably see how I was a perpetrator of this since it comes so freely in the moment, but I don't use it anymore. In fact, it makes me very uncomfortable to even think about it, which is a funny story because I'm going to tell you, every time I try to joke with my friends and I get lost in the moment and I try to make a sarcastic comment, it flops. I'm like terrible at it. I've tried it on Facebook several times and I was trying to be funny, and in retrospect, I just came off as like a jerk. Like there was one time some of my friends watch sports. We don't watch sports. I'm not really into it. But one time I just made the joke of, they were saying, you know, I don't know, go Broncos or whatever on Facebook. And they were talking about, yay, touchdown. And I made the joke, hey, if I want to hear about football, I'll tune in myself. I was trying to be funny, and I thought they were going to come back and say, hey, just deal with it. But nobody said anything. So that made me even more uncomfortable. I'm like, man, they probably just think I'm like a jerk, and was trying to shut them down when I was trying to be playful. But I'm so bad at that. I don't use sarcasm at all, but obviously I have in the past. So just tell somebody, say, you know, I just don't know what to say. I'm not shutting you out. I just need a short pause so I don't make this worse. One of the examples that Carolsue and I give, this is we're going to share overcoming this particular problem, is that Carolsue was very much into the shutting down kind of thing, and because she would get overwhelmed with the situation, because as you can see, I can start talking and keep talking. But this is where we had to learn each other's communication style. So the interesting thing is until you communicate about this, you just make assumptions, and they're bad assumptions. They're not helpful assumptions. So case in point, in these situations where we're leading up to an argument and we're getting escalated, Carolsue will shut down because she's getting emotional about it and she doesn't want to get upset. She doesn't want to say anything that's going to make it worse or upset me. And I'm a person, as we've already shared with you, I don't like to waste time. So I honestly want to get through this so we're not arguing anymore. So we can get back to being fun and watching our shows, whatever we want to do. But the interesting thing is, until we communicated that, what it looked like to each other was very different from the truth. So if she shuts down, then I think she's being avoidant. But that's not the case. But I wouldn't know that until we talked about it. And if she needs to shut down and I want to fix it, I look like I'm being controlling. So I need you to fix this. So I am not respecting that she needs to shut down. And she's not having any concern that, you know, I want to get through this and I don't want to fight all night. I've been in those before that last into the next day, if not the next week. And there's no purpose for it, because when you think about it, when you finally come back to, you know, communicating again, that time apart did nothing for you. That's not what fixed it, is that you figured out finally how to come together in those moments. So in those moments, you know, once we started talking about it, Carolsue would say, hey, this is getting a little over my head. You know, can I have some time? Give me an hour. And I'd be like, that's fine, because now I know that she does want to fix it and she's going to come back to it, and I can completely respect that boundary. So it was just a simple misunderstanding where I thought she didn't want to fix it and she thought I was just trying to control the way she handles things. And that wasn't what either one of us wanted until we actually sat down in a calm manner like this and discussed how we felt in those moments. And it was so eye-opening. And this is actually, we shared this now because although this is a podcast on awareness, we want to give you this one tool because this is a really common problem.
Yeah.
When we give that scenario out in crisis intervention training, we always have at least 2 or 3 people come up to us and say something to the equivalent of, "You just saved my marriage."
Right.
I mean, seriously, because people don't talk about talking, and that is a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
We're all about debriefing after a conflict because the conflict should not be something you welcome into your relationship. So if it shows up, then we have to talk about what we can do next time to try to reduce that or eliminate it in some capacity.
So it's normal.
Yeah.
It's very normal. But I think the thing that we don't talk about often enough, which is why this has become our focus, is that it's fixable. And
Exactly.
our responsibility in a relationship, whether it's a friendship, a colleague that you work really closely with, or a spouse or a partner, is to invest the time into doing that debrief after, not in the middle of the conflict, but after, to figure out how you can make the next conversation better.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different techniques, but one of the things that we're gonna talk about, we have several different topics, but really what it comes under is one of the things that we use to try to level the playing field is we use a lot of shame.
Yeah.
And I brought it up in the intro, but a lot of times when you're saying stuff like, "How many times do I have to tell you this?" that serves no value whatsoever. Like, you're not making that person in that moment go, "Yeah, you're right. You have to say it a lot. I want to help you with that."
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't ever go that way. You're basically just cutting the person down and saying something to hurt their feelings. So a lot of harsh criticism instead of explanation, hostile humor, generalization, like, "You always do this. You're always," those kind of things, like, usually they're not true. It's not always. But just telling somebody what they're doing is not going to make them suddenly go, "You're absolutely right. I shouldn't do that anymore." In fact, I'm going to make some major life changes right in the middle of this conversation right now and never let it happen again.
I think at some point we're going to need a top 10 list of the phrases that we just think should be removed from the human vocabulary. So we already know that "calm down" is one of them. But anything that includes "always" or "never," at absolute least, it's not going to be helpful.
Yeah, those are called globalizations. And if you do get into any kind of therapy, those things will be identified.
Yep.
But yeah, we do that a lot. We think that kind of sarcasm or condescension is going to make a person change, and it never does. And it's particularly detrimental to kids. So that's why we want to put this out there right now. And that doesn't just come with what comes out of our mouths. And I regret it. I mean, I wish, with our kid that we would have been more knowledgeable of this stuff, because I know even certain expressions like, "What is going on?" Like, that's a simple question that actually could be empathic. If I were to say, "So what's going on?" But instead I use this tone that shows my annoyance, and all that does is make a kid feel shame. And the big difference between shame and teaching is shame is you're putting that person down within themselves. You're saying that they are bad, their personality is bad, their makeup is bad. But when you specifically identify the behaviors, then that gives the subconscious idea that, it's fixable. It's like, "Hey, you're a really upbeat person. What I heard earlier sounded a little angry. Can you explain that? Give me some insight on that." I mean, that debriefing kind of thing can sometimes just bring that awareness to where it dissipates in itself. So this particular podcast is all about awareness. It's
Absolutely.
But also we want to say that, pointing it out is not going to fix it. It can actually make it worse. You've got to use creative ways to say that, "I'm hearing some frustration in your voice right now." Saying to them, "You're sort of sounding like a jerk right now." That doesn't make a person suddenly go, "Oh, I'm sorry." I mean, eventually it might, when you guys develop the coping skills and the communication skills where it could actually be playful. It's like, "Okay, sort of being a jerk right now. I'm sorry, you're right. I'll stop that." So it can evolve, but that's a product of healthy communication. When you're using it as an insult, just overall insulting never, ever helps a person improve.
Nope.
Yeah.
It doesn't, absolutely. So the next technique we want to talk about, or the next common pattern of dysfunctional communication, is hostile humor. This is like sarcasm's first cousin. So this is a joke. It's masquerading as a joke, but really it's meant to be a dig. So you'll say something like, "Oh, well, you finally decided to show up today and participate in this relationship. That's amazing." And what you think you're doing is being funny, maybe, I don't know. But the underlying tone there, again, is that sarcasm, it's hostility, which is never something that brings people together and helps to solve problems. When instead we could say, I've been really stressed waiting for us to have another chance to talk about this issue that we've been having. And I'm really glad that you're here now so we can keep talking. Just a scotch of vulnerability, right? But again, more collaborative than divisive.
Yeah. I mean, and in fact, as you progress, there's actually that same scenario. There's opportunities to be encouraging. It's like, thank you so much for showing up so we could talk about this. That's it.
So
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
you show that person, make them feel good about being in that presence, and maybe next time they'll want to be in that presence quicker, on time. So it's amazing how a little bit of encouragement. And, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm pretty old. And that, man, what's that phrase I can't stand? Builds character. Yeah, please. I know I'm gonna get I'm gonna get a bunch of emails saying that you're wrong. It builds character. Anything that anyone says that builds character they're usually wrong. I'm just gonna tell you that right now. The only thing that builds character, and I think of the word builds, okay? When you're cutting somebody down, you're not building them. The thing that builds character is when a person has a conflict, especially a child, and you help them work through it. That is what builds resilience. If kids bounce back after some kind of terrible situation, and parents like to use that as an example, kids are resilient, you don't know if that kid's resilient. You don't know if they got through that with basically the child's brain. Once they see the next butterfly, they may have forgotten that, but now they could have developed a trigger. They could have developed an insecurity that you're not aware of, and that can resurface if you don't help them process it, if you don't help them understand it. None of that stuff, cutting down your kid, cutting down anybody, does not make them stronger. Okay? It's personal entertainment for the individual issuing those words, and it's not helpful. There's so many other ways to joke with people that don't require you insulting
That's
them.
the bottom line. Yeah.
I just want to tell you that right now. There are so many other ways you can communicate something without having to be rude.
Exactly. Another very common dysfunctional communication pattern is passive aggression. This is saying one thing but meaning another thing. So let's say that your partner has spent every weekend hanging out with their friends and you're really looking forward to a weekend together. And then your partner comes home and says, hey, my buddy's in town. I think I'm going to go hang out with him for a while. And maybe let's say that I'm the one who is feeling hurt by this. And instead of saying how I feel, I just go, you know what, just do whatever you want. Now the words, do whatever you want, should mean giving permission. But the tone of what I'm saying and what I've just described that I'm feeling is that I'm hurt. And that obviously this is what they want to do. So I'm just going to let them do it because they've already decided that's what they want. So this doesn't really do much to move an honest relationship forward. So instead, you want to say, we've been real busy the last few weekends. I was really looking forward to some downtime with you. And it hurts my feelings that you're, looking forward to going back out again when I'd like us to just spend some time together. It may not be as comfortable a thing to say, but it's honest.
Yeah, like we said, most of these things are going to sound really weird because nobody talks like this, but we do. We use it all the time. We use it with other people. It's part of the way we communicate, Rather than telling them, you always do this. You're going out and you ignore me. It's better to say how you feel. These are called I statements, which is another tool that we're going to be talking about. It's like, I don't feel supported when you're out with your friends. I'd like to see a little bit more attention proactively come toward our relationship. Not even necessarily you have to say it that it's you, but a lot of people don't realize that we sort of look at the relationship as its own entity, and one of the phrases that we use is like couple member. I don't know what I'm trying to. A couple member. One of the two people in a couple might have a suggestion to do something like, hey, you want to go walk on the beach? And the other person, not for any reason other than they just don't feel like getting out of their chair, or they're playing their video games or whatever, and they're like, nah. But what you have to consider is sometimes, you may not need a walk on the beach, and actually the person asking might not even want to walk on the beach, but your relationship may need a walk on the beach. And that's proactive repair. I mean, you're doing something that actually increases the intimacy between two individuals, or just, even if it's not intimate, just the closeness of being better friends. It grows during activities, not during stagnation. I mean, it's sort of a no-brainer when you start breaking it down.
So back to the example we just talked about, let's say that, hey, my college friend is, in town for the first time in 3 years. I just really like to see him. That sounds really important to you. Could we also make plans to carve out some time for ourselves?
Exactly.
In the next few days. So it doesn't always have to be about one or the other, but making sure that if my need is that I would like to spend a little more quality time, but I don't want him to miss out on seeing a friend he hasn't seen in a while, then let's take care of both things. Let's, spend a little time with your friend, but let's also make time with each other a priority. Let's make that walk on the beach a priority too.
Exactly. Yeah. And those are things you work out together.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't me telling her that this is the way it has to be. She's not telling me that it's this way or else. There's no ultimatums. It's just working on the best solution, because everybody's different. And that's another thing that sort of, drives me crazy, is we all make these assumptions that we know people. And usually that our assumption is that they think like we do. And nobody thinks like we do. Nobody thinks like you do. Nobody has the same experience. They weren't brought up the same way. They weren't taught the same thing. They didn't have the same teachers in school. They didn't have the same friends. We're all completely different. And if anybody has the mentality of they should know that, that's something you really need to step back from. You really want to start walking that out of your vocabulary. Because honestly, thinking that, like if Carolsue does something that I don't like and I'm walking around going, she should know better, that's not solving anything. And why should she know better? She didn't learn it when I learned it. She wasn't sitting there when I was 6 years old and told that, you need to be polite when somebody's talking to you. She wasn't there for that. She could have had a completely different background. And that's something we really take for granted. And I see it all the time, especially when I'm dealing with couples. If I'm talking to one of them off to the side and they're like, he should know that. Why? I always ask him, why should he know that?
Yeah.
Why do you think he should know that? It's like, oh, that's common sense. And man, I honestly don't know what common sense is anymore. You know what I mean? It's very complex. That's why there's certain things that, we call common sense, but it really isn't. But I ramble. So another thing is interrupting, and that's a big deal. A lot of people do it, and once again, it's an identification of a deficit in coping skills. If you have to interrupt, it's because you can't sit with something that's going on. You're not coping effectively and listening to that person. At least you're not doing something that's demonstrating that you're listening. That's for sure. But if you really need to interrupt, first of all, it is disrespectful. Let people do what they do without you controlling it. Like we said earlier, adults don't like to be told what to do, and basically whenever you interrupt, you're saying, stop talking, I'm talking now. You're right. That's what it amounts to. So it's not polite. So show that person some respect. It's actually an act of affection to let somebody speak their words, get their truth out, and then honor it, with an intelligent response. Like, thanks for telling me that, or thanks for sharing, or, that's a good idea, make it part of the conversation. Yeah. So interruptions, not good. Let's
talk about, I don't want to deal with this right now.
This is probably a common thing. I'm going to tell you just my experience. I will never insult anybody. Honestly, that is the honest God truth. But I see this more prevalent in males than I do in females, just from my experience. How many times have you been in a situation where you just utter the simple words, hey, can we talk about this? And you get why do we have to talk about this right now? Well, I can't just come home from work and sit down and get just like 30 minutes. Am I traumatizing you from
No, but no, actually what I'm thinking of is I think, unfortunately, I feel like women hold our own with this one too.
Okay. All right, cool.
Yeah.
But I've had a lot of complaints from ladies where they're talking about how he just gets angry.
Yeah.
Anytime I try to talk. So that's the equivalent. I don't want to deal with this right now. And, the one thing that we recommend that you say is like, okay, that's fine if you need your peace in the moment, but I need to know when. Yeah. There has to be a compromise here, because there is a compromise on your part. If you're allowing it, if they say, I don't want to deal with this right now, and you're saying, okay, that's your compromise.
That's right.
You're giving in because you're allowing it. But I highly recommend that say, look, if this is a problem that's not going to go away. So I respect the fact that you're not ready to deal with it right now, because, there's certain things, like before coffee, things like you can't comprehend what's going on. There are times when we're just not in that zone, and that's understandable. So I highly recommend that you compromise, and it needs to be reciprocal and say, okay, I respect that. When?
Yep.
When are we going to get back together? Please give me a time. But make this part of your communication so it doesn't feel like an attack for the unengaged person. When I say unengaged, the person who has not had communication training like you all are getting right now.
Right.
Yeah. So say, all right, can we come up with probably a better way for that is, okay, can we come up with a time together? When's a good time when we can revisit this?
Yep. Absolutely. That, again, has both of you pivoting back in and putting the relationship first. Doesn't have to be right this minute, but we want to commit to actual intentional time to talk about the issue.
Exactly.
Yeah. So those are the common dysfunctional patterns that we've seen. Let's talk just a little bit about why these are so common.
Yeah.
So they feel very familiar. I think all of us grew up in households with different communication patterns, some healthy, some unhealthy, and we tend to repeat what we've learned or what we've seen. They can make us feel like we're in control, and sometimes control can feel much safer than taking a step back and having to give a little to put a relationship back together. It can feel like control is more safe.
Yeah.
And they're often modeled by our family, by our culture, or workplace environments. They're all around us, and as Todd is known for saying, it gets on us.
Yeah, you get it on you.
You get it on you.
When you're in those situations. I mean, I can be honest with you. It's highly unlikely anybody I even know is going to see this. But I grew up in a very dysfunctional environment. There was no communication. It was all punishment. Anything that went wrong, and half of it, I didn't even know what I did wrong. It was all punishment. So it was very, very poor communication. It was pretty much just an authoritarian environment. And I just had to do what I was told, and there was no expression of my own that was allowed, no negative emotional responses, no disagreement, no questioning. So I was what I would call is, basically functionally disabled when it came to communication. And I think part of the reason why this was so exciting coming across crisis intervention is because I honestly did not know how to communicate. I mean, it's very problematic, and in my past, I can see where I made these mistakes, and I do regret. I honestly regret every negative, bad thing that I've ever said to anybody that hurt their feelings. I mean, it was unnecessary, to be honest with you. It's a programming that we have. So I grew up in a very dysfunctional environment, and I don't mind saying it, it's honest. And even the times in my adult life, where I've tried to bridge those gaps, and a lot of times, one of the things you might see, we're going to warn you about this right now, is that, being involved in these videos, you're going to grow, you're going to change, and not everybody's going to be happy with that.
Yeah.
So learning these coping skills and realizing that, a lot of times it might be the other person's problem and not your problem, that's going to be something really important that you learn to understand.
So we're giving you the first tool to start changing these patterns, which is awareness.
Yes.
And information is awesome. And if you're sitting here with us, it's because you like to learn new things too. And that can be incredibly exciting. It can feel very liberating, and you can look forward to practicing these skills with other people. As Todd said, it can make some folks in your circle a little uncomfortable. talk@honestvoice.net is here for you if you want to talk through some uncomfortable interactions that you've had.
Yeah, send us your scenario. You know, there's all kinds of tools now where you can just dictate to text. You can talk to text. Just tell us what your scenario. My parents are always getting on me, my husband, my wife, whatever. Every time I say this, you get this. We'll throw you some personalized scenarios, and we want feedback. If we give you some pointers and you try them and they fail, because like I said, we're all different. So, we're going to give you what's worked for us in the past, or we're going to give you best practices based on crisis intervention literature out there, because we've read a lot of that stuff. We'll give you best practices, but it still might not work for everybody. And I think that's why that's one of the main reasons we give the disclaimer at the beginning that, we're not therapists. We're not here to fix, we're not here to provide any kind of clinical intervention. We're here to train in behaviors. And a lot of times, fake it till you make it is sometimes it's a worthy endeavor. I mean, sometimes if you just I'm going to focus on this, and it sort of works out in the long run. It's not really fake. That's a bad analogy, but just saying that I'm going to be in a more positive mood when I'm interacting with somebody that's negative, that's sort of a fake it till you make it, because, somebody screaming at you and calling you every name in the book, it's not a natural response to go ahead and say, I can see you're really upset.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, there's one officer that wrote a book on verbal de-escalation, and the title is something like The Hardest Job You'll Ever Have to Do. And that's what he's talking about, is being in the face of really mean and angry people and staying cool the whole time. And, we're going to show you how to do that because it's all a mindset.
So we encourage you to spend a little time reflecting on which, if any, of these common patterns have shown up in your life, whether it's something you grew up with or something that you're seeing in your workplace or your family life around you now. We absolutely encourage you to reach out to us. We intend this to be a community. We want to keep learning from others what you're experiencing. So everything that you share with us just makes us better at what we do and helps us all to learn from each other. So please do reach out. If you have questions, if you have stories you want to share, scenarios you want to talk through, we are here.
Yeah, so basically the tool for our first one, we put this in the OO, but we want to go ahead and reinforce that we're not being lazy by using the same tool. So
that's right.
For this first podcast, the tool we want to give you is, we want you to do two things basically. One is we want you to pause before you feel any kind of frustration. You feel yourself getting ready to say something. I want you to pause and I want you to think about it. And if you can, add, how would this sound if someone was saying it to me? Because it's really important to consider that, because it's weird that a lot of the things that really frustrate us, we actually do ourselves. And we see it all the time. It's like, I've literally been corrected by somebody that like an hour later does exactly the same thing they just corrected me about. And it amazes me. So the other tool is, we all have the app Notepad on our phones. So start an honest voice, basically journal or log, and keep it simple, because a lot of people don't get into journaling because it's like, I don't feel like typing all that stuff. And it can get arduous, but at least keep a list of awareness and start monitoring that, because what that's going to do, the first step in correcting any kind of behavioral situation or any environmental situation is awareness. Yep. You can't approach it effectively to repair until you have become aware of it. So that's a simple one. Just start writing the awareness and put yourself in there too. Like, I noticed the first thing out of my mouth was sarcasm when my friend was saying something to me, because that is the pattern that you've developed with that person or those people. So correct it and pull it back, and maybe even model it with your friend. It's like, you know what? I want to stop using sarcasm. There's other jokes that we could be telling about each other. Yeah. And so we can basically move past that kind of practice, is what it is. When you're practicing sarcasm, practicing negative communication, you get better at it.
That's right.
So with that, the same thing can happen with positive communication.
Yep.
You get better at it. You find out that it's actually more beneficial. It's amazing the amount of stress that just sort of dissipates out of your life when you're more focused on positive outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. So, and like I said, in the OO is, I'm not talking about toxic positivity where you always look for the grass is greener on the other side, or whatever. There's rainbows, or there's people there's people out there doing much worse than you. None of that stuff helps. Yeah. Just encouraging, support, and being honest and kind. As weird and cliche as that sound, it really, really works.
It does work.
And the benefits are, they're unfathomable. Once it starts happening, it's actually sort of mind-blowing how the environment just changes around you. It's like the scene in The Wizard of Oz when it goes from black and white to a color scene. Yeah. It's amazing.
It is.
That's all I got.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. So in our next podcast, we're going to be talking about breaking the cycle of silence. So for those of us who do sometimes have a hard time participating in tough conversations, and maybe we escape into silence or avoidance, we're going to talk about how to speak up without blowing up. Excellent. Give you those wonderful communication tools.
All right, and thanks for tuning in for Honest Voice, and we'll see you next week.
Have a great day.